Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Art Chadwick. Q&A with our live audience and host, Anil Kanda. Today's episode, does science disprove intelligent design and a global flood? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
Well, I was going to start with a joke about time travel, but I already knew you weren't going to like it. But tonight, we're traveling way back in time, past disco, bell-bottoms, past the first toga party, to the very origins of our world. We're talking about the start of everything. Did we come from atoms or Adam? Here to discuss our world's origin story with me is a research professor of biology and geology. He has led major research projects and is the co-founder and director of the Earth History Research Center, a global consortium of research scientists focused on issues of origins. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Art Chadwick. Dr. Chadwick, glad you're here.
Good to be here.
Now let's talk about your origin story first. You weren't always a creation scientist, a creationist. How did you go from being an evolutionist to becoming a creationist?
It kind of happened backwards. I started out thinking evolution was the way we originated, and then I discovered Jesus. And when I read the story in the Bible, it convinced me, this was in high school, it convinced me that there was something here that needed to be studied out. So when I went to college, I had two professors. This was a secular university. I had two professors that both testified about Jesus to me, which was an amazing experience. So from then on, I looked at both ideas together. And then when I went off to graduate school and did my PhD in molecular biology, I realized that there's no other alternative.
You know, when it comes to the study of science, there's lots of views about the origins of our world, of our universe. Some people claim the universe just simply created itself. Some people have said the universe has always been here. What began to make you question some of these predominant themes of the creation of our universe?
I think it started with macrobiology. When you look at organisms, when you look at people, when you look at a flower, you realize that these things just didn't happen. They had a source. And for humans, we know what the source was, the parents. For the flower, we know it's a seed, but where'd the seed come from? And ultimately, as I said, when I took molecular biology, I realized that evolution doesn't have a foot in the door.
Now, you also have an interest in geology and paleontology as well. How did that come to be?
When I finished my degree, I went back, I did a postdoc. I realized at that point that evolution was a non-starter because of the complexities in the cell. But I also thought, why is it the way? Why are things the way they are today, and how did it get that way? And so while I was in my postdoc, I went back to school and started taking geology. When I finished it, I went to University of California and took a serious geology program and completed that so that I could talk to the issues of geology, because while biology looked straightforward to me, there were a lot of questions I had about geology.
Now, you must have been a loner then in regards to your graduate studies, or were you not alone in the things that you believed in?
Well, I went to church. I had friends, but in my graduate program, I was alone, yeah. Yeah, that's a good experience because it toughens you up.
It forced you to re-examine some things, come up with better answers for the things you believed in? Did you feel like there was confirmation bias here, or did you feel like, no, this is what I was just seeing in the evidence, in the data, and in the research?
Well, I think in the molecular biology realm, it definitely was the data that convinced me. and not any particular person or anything else. It just stands on its own.
What were some of the things that you discovered in your research?
Well, as I went ahead in molecular biology and began to study the internal structures of the cell, I found out that there are whole cities and universes inside the cell. The cell is not just a bag of fluid like Darwin thought it was. It's highly structured. And just one aspect of that, for example, the ATP synthase that makes the energy that keeps us going, is an electric motor. And every aspect, it turns, and as it rotates, it causes a perturbation, and those are all protein molecules. And that perturbation is used as the energy to push a phosphate onto an ADP molecule and make ATP. And that's what keeps us alive from instant to instant, makes our brains run. It's the synthetic system of the cell. And there are 1 million of these in every cell. They are 10,000 of them would fit across the width of a human hair.
Whoa,
I mean, they're
10,000.
really, really tiny. But there are 1 million in every cell. And that's what keeps us alive from moment to moment.
Dr. Chadwick, as you're examining the complexities that exist within just a single cell, what is that teaching you about the Creator?
He is beyond elegant and beyond intellectual. I mean, there is no way a human being could have conceived of these things.
God's just showing off?
Yeah, I wouldn't use that language myself, but that's exactly what I think is going on here. Nobody could claim to be able to make something like this on that scale.
Did you ever present these kinds of questions to the fellow students and to professors?
I don't think I was evangelistic in graduate school. I kind of kept my nose down and worked hard. But once I had gotten out of there and gotten out into the world, and I realized this story is too important not to tell, I haven't stopped.
I mean, the fact that you have access to all this information, you see what's going on, it can't help but talk about, the great God that we believe in. Now, what have your studies taught you about the origins of our world?
The world itself, the universe, I'm not a physicist, I'm not an astrophysicist, and I try to stay within my domain. But as far as the origin of life, I think we have a very strong story there. There is no possibility, zero, and you can rank that any way you want. There is no possibility that life came from non-living material. Many people who study this for their livelihood have acknowledged that. But those who haven't looked at the data. And we could go into detail on that, but it's just a non-starter.
There's a reason why the Bible says the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. He seems to be denying the most obvious thing in our world, in our universe, that we wouldn't be here without a creator. In regards to origins, what would you say are some of these impassable barriers that you're talking about?
It is true. You can take a little child out in a field of flowers and ask them who made the flowers. They have no difficulty answering that question. However, when we become more sophisticated adults, we have difficulty saying those words. Nonetheless, the truth is still there. The complexity of life is beyond the capabilities of random, undirected, non-goal-oriented processes.
When I went to school, I went to public high school, and we were taught that evolution is just the basis of life. We have so many scientists that teach and preach, if you want, evolution and naturalism, scientific naturalism. If you had 30 seconds in an elevator with just a rock-ribbed evolutionist, what would you say to him?
I would start with the origin of life, because that's an area that I think is easy to grasp, and ask him if he can explain to me how even one protein, functional protein, could come into existence. And he wouldn't have anything to say. Now, that may not be where I want to leave him,
Right.
because I'm not here to just upset people or to confute their answers. I would want to try to touch him with Jesus somehow, by pointing out that there had to be an author, there had to be a creator, and life just doesn't come out of nothing.
You know, after a lifetime of research, of study, of teaching, has anything you've discovered or found deepened your love for God, for the Creator?
Well, I think of that every day when I consider my research, and especially when I was doing molecular biology. I was in awe of God all the time. And I used to, when I taught molecular biology to my students, I used to get quite angry when I would see the authors of the textbook trying to explain some amazing detail as an evolutionary thing that just fell out of the sky. And I would say, look, this is not right. There's something wrong with a system that forces you to find an explanation apart from the obvious one, which is that there's an amazing designer behind this.
As you're going through this, it sounds like as you come across these complexities and just the detail of the cells, it just deepens your love for God, who put such effort even into the little things of our universe.
Yeah, it's so small that you can't see any of it with your eyes. The only reason we know about it is because of modern science has opened to us the gates of understanding with things smaller than we can see.
Wow, that's really fascinating. A whole universe contained within the cell. I can just imagine just the awe. Yeah. Do you ever just sometimes when you're looking through, I don't know if it's exactly a microscope or some other technology, we're able to see into that, you look back and you just start, wow, this is just so mind-blowing. You have moments like that?
Absolutely. I used to study, well, part of my research was had to do with microtubules. Microtubules are little structures that form in the cytoplasm of the cell that are, at least when I was working on many years ago, we really didn't know what it meant. We just saw them there. We said, oh, these structures are in the cytoplasm. Now we know they're the highways of the cell, and there are little men that walk on these highways from place to place carrying big, giant, what we call vesicles, or big, giant tanks of stuff. So everything is orchestrated inside the cell. And when we found out there were highways there, we found out there are policemen there. There are UPS drivers that scan codes on these vesicles, on these tanks of material. They have scan codes on them, and they're scanned to see if they're in the right place. If they're not, they will turn them around and send them off somewhere else. I mean, who knew? And just to think that something like that could happen without an amazingly intelligent mind is ludicrous. There is no room in my understanding of this world for a mindless production of something so complex.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
Even people that believe the Standard Model talk about factories and machines and motors inside the cells. And it's difficult to avoid the implications of that, which is that there must be a machinist, there must be a designer, there must be a fabricator to get all this to work together.
Well, I've seen, computer simulated models of what's inside of a cell. And this was from maybe 10, 12 years ago. But you're saying it's even infinitely more complex than that. You know, sometimes we see diagrams of cell, there'll be 3 or 4 parts we see in a cell, but you're saying there are entire vast universes and cities within these cells themselves.
Yeah, this is not consistent, but I like to say the cell has all the complexity of a human being inside this little tiny space. It does everything in that cell that we do. There are decisions made, as I said, there are traffic cops, there are UPS drivers, there are little vehicles that travel around in the cell, and there are motors and factories, and it just goes on and on. The depth of our understanding of the cell is overwhelming.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I know we have more to discuss, Dr. Chadwick, and I'm excited about this conversation. We've been discussing the origins of Earth with Dr. Art Chadwick and how his research led him from evolutionism to creationism. When we return, we'll dive deeper into his discoveries and explore a seemingly different yet deeply connected topic, the flood. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We're talking to Dr. Art Chadwick, the co-founder and director of the Earth History Research Center, a global consortium of research scientists focused on issues of origins. Dr. Chadwick, the Bible talks about not just creation in the very beginning, it talks about this global, massive, worldwide flood that wiped out most of the earth. Now, I grew up in a culture, the Hindu culture, where we also learned about a worldwide flood, and this is pretty prevalent in many different cultures about a worldwide flood. Based upon your study and your research, what have you discovered in regards to this biblical flood story?
All of my research from the time I finished my graduate project down to the present, and I'm still involved in a number of active research projects, has been focused on questions that didn't seem to be consistent with the biblical flood. So I took hard questions like, for example, down in the bottom of Grand Canyon, there's a layer of rock called the Tapete Sandstone, which is supposed to be 500 million years old. And it was supposed to have been deposited slowly over many, many thousands and millions of years by gradual accretionary processes. We studied it for many years and were able to publish a paper describing it as being deposited in deep water rather than shallow water, and that if it's deposited in deep water, it has to be fast because you can't move sand grains in deep water. So we were able to show that this deposit, which had been ranked at 15 million years or something like that, that it could have been done almost instantaneously, and that it had to be very fast.
Would you say, based upon your study of paleontology and when you're looking into the fossil record, is there evidence of a global flood there within the fossil record itself?
I think just the fact that you have a fossil record is evidence of a flood, because we aren't finding fossils being formed today. It's very difficult to find an environment where you can preserve the intricate details of these well-preserved fossils. All the details of the insides of these animals are still preserved. That means they were buried instantaneously, much more like what you'd expect in a catastrophic process than with gradual accretionary processes over many, many years. So that's a very strong indicator of a global flood.
That's really fascinating because, some of the mainstream theories out there is that an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs. But the biblical story, which was well written well before paleontology became a science, is telling us this global catastrophe took place, and by implication, we probably should expect to find the remains, or at least somewhat records of all these creatures that existed. And when paleontology did become a science, this was confirming the fact that, the biblical story seemed in part at least to be true.
Yes.
But in regards to the story of the flood, in regards to even the study of geology, Is the Earth giving strong evidence that this global catastrophe actually took place, this sort of worldwide flood? I mean, when you're looking at the evidence, is it really showing evidence this took place all over the world, or was this localized?
I think this piece of data probably is one of the most compelling arguments we have. The layering that we see in rocks, if you ever go out and look at rocks, you're going to see some kind of internal structure in the rocks. That is a testimony against long time, because today if we deposit a layer of rock, a layer of sediment, it's shortly going to be reworked by the animals that live in it. Whether it's above sea level and it's gophers and roots, or below sea level and it's worms and bioturbators that live in the bottom of the ocean, they're going to rework all that sediment. If it's deposited slowly, there shouldn't be any of those lines anywhere. The fact that you can go out and see a rock that shows lines in it is evidence that it was deposited rapidly, inconsistent with the standard model, which suggests millions of years.
That's really fascinating. Now, I've also heard that there are marine fossils at the top of mountains. Is that true?
It's true, but it doesn't really mean anything, because the standard model suggests those sediments were down on the bottom of the ocean and they were pushed up there by the uplift of the mountains.
But you don't see that as contradictory to the fact
Not
of
at all.
biblical flood.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't, let's say it's not strong evidence for a biblical flood.
Not an airtight case
Yeah.
there, right? Where did all the water go, though?
I think there's some possibility that if you lowered all the land areas today, they would all be covered by water. So it is possible with the water we have on the Earth today to cover all the continents. I don't know. I have heard the suggestion that some of the water is the comets that we have out in space was blown out of the Earth's atmosphere. I don't know if that's even possible. I haven't done any calculations on it. But I think maybe some of it is down underneath us. There's far more water down in the rocks than there is on the surface of the Earth as well.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I've heard of bodies of water trapped underneath. I mean, we have aquifers today where we tap water from water, but I heard there's been some discoveries of giant bodies of water. That's really interesting. What do you do when you find scientific information that seems to challenge your faith?
Well, there's lots of that. And I guess I've taught philosophy of science for many years and am teaching it right now, as a matter of fact. And it's clear in philosophy that your ideas are the result of what you have developed all through your life. So you come into this world empty as a tabula rasa, but it's not very long until that's written on. And those things that are written, even when you're young, tend to be the things that cause you to come to certain conclusions. It's not the data. Scientific data are pretty much neutral in most cases. It's the interpretation of the data. And the interpretation means it has to go through a mind, and that mind is colored by the circumstances of your life.
Yeah, the data doesn't interpret itself. There's an interpretation that comes upon data. You talked about the philosophy of science. I actually took a class on philosophy of science one time, and the teacher, this was many years ago. I don't know if she's still alive, but her name was Cain, Judy Cain, like Cain who slew Abel. And she made it her focus to make sure that people who believed in the Bible, those that believed in a creator, were nothing but it was just foolishness, nothing but child's play. But I do remember something really fascinating, what she said about the philosophy of science. In this course, she described that science isn't supposed to be dogmatic itself. And she says that every scientific revolution that took place, as much as we can tell, all the major breakthroughs, is when people were willing to look outside established scientific principles. And when they did that, there would oftentimes be breakthroughs in science. And the ultimate conclusion from that was that science was was supposed to be a doctrine of discovery. It was not supposed to be dogmatic in one sense, but a doctrine of discovery.
Yes, and that's true for people who understand the philosophy of science. But most scientists and most lay people think that science is telling us the truth, and if a scientist says something, that's the way it is. I teach my class over and over again, and it's very difficult that nothing is forever, that every finding of science is tentative forever. And that's very hard to swallow because most of us have been raised thinking when a scientist spoke, that was it.
That's the end of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time that scientists were recommending lobotomies. I've got to just ask you, and I want you to just be as direct with me as possible, completely unbiased here. As you are looking at paleontology, geology, molecular biology, as you've looked at all the data, all the information, how sure are you that God is behind this?
100%, but that is my opinion. I think there is no doubt, because of my molecular biology background, when I encounter problems in geology I don't have an answer for, or paleontology, I can lay back on the issues that I learned in molecular biology and know that there is a God.
That's beautiful. Would you also say that all the data, not the interpretation of the data, but the data that we are finding in the ground confirms or is not in any way contradictory to the scriptural account of creationism and the flood and the origins?
Yes, although there are lots of things I don't have answers for, and I can't tell you why. But I think ultimately it will turn out that that's the case.
Okay. So, but
we can talk about hard issues, but it is clear to me that ultimately, because of all of my life study, we have taken the hard problems in origins and studied them out and spent years, sometimes 10 years, on one problem. And when we're through, we have another explanation that's consistent with the biblical account. It doesn't prove the Bible account. I don't think that's our goal, and that shouldn't be any goal in science. But it is consistent with it.
You know, you've taught classes on this stuff. You believe it. I'm sure you've written about it. Have you ever shared a lecture where someone says outrightly, "I completely disagree with this"? What do you do in that moment?
I congratulate them. I said, that's good. That means you're thinking. Now let's go back and see if we can come to some consensus. And then we'll go back over whatever it is he disagrees about. And we can always agree to disagree. It's not with my students anyway, I don't feel like I need to compel them to believe anything. That's not the way Jesus worked.
Right. You're sharing the evidence, you're giving the viewpoints, the world views, and allowing people to come to a conclusion.
Yes.
And you're confident that many of them, hopefully, if they're honest with the information, would see and believe the things that you believe in.
And when it rolls right back to the beginning, I think we have an airtight case. I don't like to say that because I've told my students nothing's proved. You can't say proved in science, but I think we have a pretty airtight case.
In regards to the scientific research, what do you do with your doubts?
I don't hide them. I put them up on a shelf where I can see them and be reminded of them once in a while. But I don't let them sidetrack me or keep me from moving ahead in my research. But I think it would be very bad to hide your doubts. I think you need to give them the air and sunshine, fresh air and sunshine that will make them tell you more.
I appreciate the honesty there, because some people, say, "Oh, there should be no doubt whatsoever. You shouldn't have any question about it." But the reality is we don't have all the answers, especially in regards to science and the data. I mean, the world itself is just thrown into chaos. It seemed that the flood itself just really threw the world into a chaotic state, and so when it comes to trying to understand the data and information in regards to origins, I can see that can be quite challenging.
Yeah, as you know, scientists don't want the answer to everything. They don't want to have the answer to everything. Lay people think we have to have every answer to every question. Scientists say, oh, here's an unanswered question. Let me work on that. And if they have the answers to all the questions, they're out of business. So we're comfortable probably more than other people with unanswered questions.
Wow, that's really fascinating in regards to science, because that's not usually the perception of how science should be, at least from the lay level. So, in regards to, you're a Bible-believing Christian and you're also a scientist. Are those two things contradictory to each other? Or can you be a fully committed Bible believer and a fully committed scientist?
I am. No, I think it actually gives you more freedom to look at ideas than a scientist who doesn't accept the Bible, because the Bible suggests a lot of things that are different from where science is today, and a conventional standard model scientist is not going to look at those things. But I can look at them, and I can also look at what the other scientists are looking at. So I have more freedom than a conventional scientist does.
It's really fascinating when you're reading the flood story in the book of Genesis, this global flood story, and then you read the New Testament. Jesus confirmed his belief in the flood story. He confirmed the existence of Noah and the things that took place during that flood story. But there are a lot of Christians today who said, you know what, I believe Jesus, I believe the New Testament, I don't know if I buy the book of Genesis. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, 2 Peter chapter 3 tells the same story. It says in the last days people are going to come scoffing at the idea of creation and a global flood. And that's a prediction. That's a prophecy that has been fulfilled. And it was fulfilled almost in the same exact words. Peter says, no, denying the creation and the flood and the second coming of Jesus. And the father of modern geology, a man by the name of James Hutton, says in his introduction to his 3-volume work on the origin of geology, he says, when I look into the history of the earth, I see no vestige of a beginning, in other words, no creation, and no prospect of an end, no second coming of Jesus. So he exactly fulfills the prophecy of 2 Peter. And he's the father of modern geology, James Hutton is.
Do you think a denial of the book of Genesis and the flood story, creationism, is more evidence-based, or do you feel that there's a bias towards Christianity?
Well, if you look at the origin of the ideas, the secular ideas, back in the 1700s, everybody believed that there was a creator. Nobody doubted it. And gradually, over a period of years, the idea arose that maybe there wasn't a creator. And if there isn't a creator, I don't have to deal with the issues in my life. And so there's this kind of pressure to accept an idea that makes you the most important person and the smartest person around, and not God. If I'm just thinking his thoughts after him, then he gets all the credit. But if there is no God, then I get the credit for what I've done. So I think that's human nature. It's not any particular person. And I love all these scientists. I don't have anything against them. I want them to enjoy the pleasure of knowing Jesus. And so I respect them, and we are friends.
Appreciate your attitude and your spirit in just the openness and dialogue, because some people aren't that way. Some people don't want to be that way. It's determination. I'm right and no one else matters. I know we have much more to talk about. Well, what can I say? Geology rocks. Sorry if you want more jokes. I'm going to have to dig them up. We have much more to explore on this topic, which is why we'll be opening the floor to questions from our studio audience. But before we get to that, I want to invite you to visit our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight, where you can view previous episodes and resources and also download a free gift. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been talking about our origin story with Dr. Art Chadwick and the evidence that he has found to support the biblical account. But now we're going to give our studio audience the chance to ask their questions. Who would like to start us off? Right over there.
Yes, some people would try to inject millions of years of evolution into 6 days of creation. What would you tell them?
A lot of people who want to hold on to their Christian faith and still want to be consistent with a standard model of science will try to make some compromise where they put millions of years into 6 days of creation. That started even with the famous French scientist who was responsible for suggesting that every day was 1,000 years. And so this idea goes back a long ways, but it doesn't help, because if you want a day to be 1,000 years, that doesn't change the amount of time available. If you're going to go with the standard model thinking and you want it to be a long period of time, you need millions and millions. You need an infinite amount of time, really. But it's a compromise. And anytime you compromise, you're going to lose something. And what you lose in this case is both the truthfulness of the biblical account and the truthfulness of science. So scientists laugh at it, and theologians who are consistent with the Bible think it doesn't help at all.
Right. It begins to break down the direction of Scripture from the very beginning. If
Right.
creationism is symbolic, then the fall of man is symbolic,
Right.
then the promise given to man is symbolic,
Right.
then the global flood is symbolic, and it's just like, it turns allegorical, and you can interpret it however you want. Jesus himself affirmed the creation account, the Genesis
He
account.
did.
Yeah. Really fascinating. Any other questions? Right over there.
With regards to the worldwide flood, how do the people who wrote the Bible even know what the scope of the world was?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially if you have a concentration of, the early people in a certain area. How did they know what a worldwide flood would have been?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think even we have this myth that Christopher Columbus was brave in thinking the world was round, and that was his perspective. But long before Jesus came to the earth, we knew that the earth was round. Scientists knew this, and they even tried to calculate the diameter. So there was some sense in how big the world was that goes back way into the past. But as far as being a worldwide flood, that could only have come from God himself, who saw the whole thing. So it would have had to be at his direction, and he would have had to tell Moses, who wrote the account, he would have had to explain this to Moses.
Right. It's not like Moses came across the evidence. God explained it to
Right.
him. But what you have found in your scientific research is there's evidence of a global flood everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Not just in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's consistent around the world. I can go to Africa, I can go to China, I can go to Europe, I can go to North America, and find the same evidences that I mentioned earlier: the fossil record, the sediments that contain internal structure that shouldn't be there. All of that suggests to me that it had to be a global scale.
Fascinating. Any other questions?
Yes. So I'm wondering, how do you balance your faith when you're collaborating with other scientists who often do not believe in God?
What I try to do is get it out in the open as soon as possible so that I'm not deceiving them. I have collaborated and still am collaborating. We just published a paper this year with some other scientists that are not necessarily Christians or creationists. They're what I would describe as secular scientists. but they knew exactly what we believed. Because we're consistent in our presentations, we don't make things up. And because we've done really good work in science, they respect us as scientists. And once you have respect, then you can do it. You can work together.
That's great. You can still have this relationship with other scientists who believe differently.
Sure. I love these people. I care about them. I can think of some friends that when we get together, we hug, but they don't believe what I believe. And that's just the kind of friendship we develop. And that once you've developed that, then you can go places.
Great. Any other questions?
Do you think that a meteor hitting the Earth could have caused the global flood you spoke about?
Yes, I don't know that it did, but I can think of something like that hitting the Earth causing a massive catastrophic process. I think in some respects the global flood was not as violent as that in its beginning. I think there was a gradual increase in the amount of water and the movement of sediments that buried things so that they got buried in an systematic way. We don't see what I call a wearing blender model of the flood where everything gets thrown in and churned up. What we see is that there is a gradual and accretionary process going on. So I think that wouldn't be consistent with a meteoric impact. But there are people that believe that, and I think even Immanuel Velikovsky, the science writer, suggested that meteorites were responsible for some of these things.
So from a biblical perspective, what do we say, what do we do with meteors?
Well, there are meteorite impacts. We have the crater out in Arizona in the United States, and there are craters like this in various places around the world. Up in Canada, there's some, and in Africa and elsewhere. Most of them we don't know about because they're buried in the ground, but these few craters we do know about. So we think there have been meteoric impacts. And of course, the big one at the end of the Cretaceous that supposedly caused the dinosaurs to go extinct is one that a lot of people believe in.
Was there a great catastrophe that took place from when the meteor hit the Earth? Or was there, I mean, because again, some of these models suggest that this, obviously a dust cloud went up in the air, blocked out the sun, there was volcanic explosions, and that brought about the end of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, but not the other creatures,
Yeah.
which is kind of hard to fathom. But yes, I think whether there was or was not the big impact that they talk about down in Mexico, the Chicxulub impact structure, I think meteorites would impact our lives very much if they were to hit the Earth. And I think we need to be very much aware of what's out there in space. And we are.
Right.
I mean, they track objects all the time because of the danger of impact.
Yeah, and that's becoming definitely much more of science and an awareness, right? That, hey, we have this object coming close to the Earth, this many miles off, and et cetera. So really interesting. Any other questions? Right over there.
Well, when was the global flood?
Again, it depends on your model. If you believe there was a global flood, you have to place it in Earth history. And the Bible places it several thousand years before Christ. And I think that's probably what I would go with, but I wouldn't tie it down to a particular year. I think some people, Ussher's chronology puts it at a year, but I would suggest it was a few thousand years before Christ. And that would make it less than 10,000 years ago.
Right, and the biblical account is that, right? It was a number of thousands of years ago. Does geology bring any confirmation to that?
The secular model of geology, what I call the standard model, doesn't really even witness to a single global catastrophe. Although over the years they have come around to find more and more catastrophes, they tend to think of those as micro catastrophes or localized catastrophes rather than something global. And maybe I should say something now about the age of the earth and what a Christian should believe about that, because I think it's really important that we have a perspective on what we have to believe and what we don't have to believe. Personally, I don't care if the flood was, if the creation of the universe was 6,000 years ago or many millions of years ago, because it doesn't affect our understanding of God or his character. And in the Bible, God actually says, in the beginning he created. He doesn't say 6,000 years ago, or he doesn't say he created it in 6 days. He says in the beginning he did it. And the earth was already here when he comes down in Genesis 1. It was sitting there with water on the surface and so on. So that was all in place. And so I think it's consistent with the Bible. If you want to believe the universe is old, it can be. And so then where was the flood? The flood would still be sometime in that period of history since God created 6,000 years ago.
Dr. Chadwick, what you're telling us is essentially the formation of this planet, the creation of Earth, is not something that's clarified in Scripture, but the origin of life that is clarified in Scripture as being thousands of years ago.
Exactly.
And there's a difference, right? We don't want to conflate those two
Right.
events happening simultaneously.
Right. So
Right.
somebody that believes that the universe has been here for billions of years is not necessarily negating the Bible. It's consistent with the idea that God in the beginning did it. As long as you attribute it to God, that's the other issue is when was life on the earth?
Right.
And that one is settled in the rest of Genesis 1, where God describes how he did it. And that part of it could have taken place many millions of years later as the earth sat here without any life on it.
Right. And the scriptural account paints God coming to this planet thousands of years ago and beginning life
Right.
there. But again, how long this earth has been here, we don't know when God put that in motion.
Right. And I think that's important to make that distinction so we don't condemn people who believe differently than we do on
Right.
it.
That makes sense. Any other questions? Right over there.
Could you share with us another amazing discovery from your scientific studies?
Yes, I think probably within the cell there are systems that we have just recently rediscovered. We can't say we discovered them because God made them. There are systems of language inside the cell that we never knew were there. And we've discovered several levels of these. And every level that we discover is another set of complex interactions inside the cell that are different than what we thought. And so there's a language that's written in the chromosomes in the form of little tags that are put on the proteins that surround the chromosomes that dictates when the chromosomes are made active. And it's a language that has to be controlled from above. So there has to be control for that language that controls the language of the chromosomes and so on. So you get this hierarchical structure inside the cell that is ever more complex. And that to me is just absolutely amazing.
I got to ask you, are there moments that when you're looking at this, you just start singing worship songs and praise songs to God?
No, not that, but my mouth falls open a lot.
Any other questions? Right over there.
So what role does mutation play in the evolution of a species?
Well, that's a really good question, because at the time of Charles Darwin and afterwards, they were just discovering mutations. We now know a lot about mutations. They change genes, they change DNA code, but they really don't do anything in the cell. And for example, if you just randomly mutate an organism, it's not for its own good. It's going to destroy something. Something will stop working. Or if you're lucky, it may turn something on that was turned off so that it begins to work. But it doesn't generate the features that we're talking about. And it turns out that a lot of times all mutations do are turn on and off new features inside the cell that we didn't know were there. So Darwinian evolution has had to be changed, and in the last 5 or 6 years they have found a whole new system of genetics called epigenetics, which is the marking of proteins that surround the DNA. It's not the DNA itself, it's a very complicated, intricate code on the proteins that hold the DNA down. And whatever that protein, whatever that code says, causes the genes to be active or inactive. Just to show you how powerful it was, a study in Nature just a few years back was done with mice, and the mice were exposed to a pleasant odor, it happened to be cherry blossoms, and when the exposure to the odor took place, they would shock the mice. So the mice learned when they smelled cherry blossom to run. They then took those mice and they bred them together, and they took the offspring of those mice away and raised them up, and then they exposed them to cherry blossom odor and they would run. And then they did that the 3rd generation, and finally after the 4th generation it seemed to be lost. And the article in Nature magazine the headline was "The Sins of the Father," which is an interesting allusion to the Bible, because in the 2nd commandment it says the sins of the father will be visited on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me. And it seems like behavior can be encoded in genes. And that's astonishing. And not only behavior, but also various features like eye color and hair and other features of living organisms are controlled by this coding in the DNA, on the proteins that surround the DNA. And so that seems to be more powerful than mutations, which seem ultimately to be harmful. And so I think the idea of mutations being a useful explanation for origin is gone. Just doesn't hold up anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in traditional evolutionary models, mutations were seen constantly as the advantage. This is how change takes place because of all these mutations. And what you're telling us is that mutations now, in more of the research and study behind it, it's oftentimes seen as a disadvantage to a species.
Absolutely. And this new system of coding on the proteins that surround the DNA, it has to be controlled. So there's controls, there's a whole suite of enzymes that are responsible for putting these markers on. That higher system has to be controlled as well. And so you have this hierarchy of control that can never have evolved. It's just another evidence that life is far more complex than we give it credit for.
Wow. Got time for another question? Right over there.
I was just curious what your thoughts were on carbon dating.
Wow, that's a long question. That's a hard question. You kind of hit me below the belt because that's the one, probably the most strongest argument against the ideas that I put forth, that there was a global flood a few thousand years ago. We do not have really good answers about why radiometric dating works. And I'm going to assume you mean radiometric dating rather than radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon dating, we have a good understanding of that. It can only date fossils, and it only works for a period of 40,000 years or so. When you're talking millions of years, those are other dating methods like rubidium, strontium, lead, uranium, and potassium, argon, and things like that. They date for millions of years. I wish I could tell you, oh, I've got that solved. I don't. But it's on the shelf. I know it's there. I look at it every once in a while. And I remind myself to be humble because I don't have all the answers. And so I would say that we have, for radiocarbon dating, we have a good understanding of that. But for these other radiometric methods, I just don't have an explanation within the framework that I'm presenting to you of a few thousand years. So, okay, that's a problem. I don't understand it. That's okay for me, because as a scientist, I'm trying to understand things, I have to have some things I don't understand in order to work.
Right, and there's an element of faith here because at the end of the day, none of us were there to witness these things, right? Whether it's the atheist, the agnostic, or the Christian, and it's like we've got to determine based upon as we're thinking through things and looking at evidence and seeing how the world works, what are all these things pointing to?
Yeah, and I would hate to come to God in judgment and say, well, God, I didn't believe your story about origins because of radiometric dating. And he would say, well, you know, I knew you couldn't figure that out, so I told you what I did. What would I say? You know?
Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Chadwick. When we look at the world around us, from the vastness of the universe to the beauty of nature to the complexity of our own DNA, we can't help but wonder, where did it all begin? The question of origins is more than just science or philosophy. It's about purpose. If we are here by chance, then life is just a series of random events. But if we were created by a loving God, then our lives have meaning, intention, and destiny. And I personally believe that we are not random accidents. You were created by a God who sees you, who loves you, and who longs to walk with you. Don't just take my word for it. I want to encourage you to explore and study it for yourself. You can also visit hopetv.org/hopeatnight to view past episodes, find resources, and download this season's free gift and continue your journey into the truth. Thank you for joining us tonight. Until next time, keep seeking, keep believing, and keep holding on to Hope at Night.